We wanted to start this morning, and we're going to try to tag team a little bit. So you have the organized, outlined, and the Post-it note lesson planner over here. Okay, so we wanted to start actually from something Dan said earlier this week. He pointed us to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. We were surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Now, Hebrews in the previous chapter, in chapter 11, begins with a definition of faith. Hebrews says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And then Hebrews 11 proceeds to give a history of the Old Testament. One of the things that I do in my freshman theology class, it's an Old Testament course. The final exam at the end of the year is the students have to give an oral presentation telling the story from Exodus to Maccabees. So about 1,500 years of biblical history they have to tell in 5 to 7 minutes.
So, Michael, are you ready to come up and give a demonstration?
He did great. He passed. But there's a long and revered tradition in Scripture to retell the story. We hear it a lot in the Psalms. Stephen, when he is before the Sanhedrin in Acts chapter 7, gives a history lesson to the Sanhedrin and kind of how do you not see that all of this is fulfilled in Christ? And so it's an opportunity for us to remember the mighty works of God. His faithfulness, his enduring faithfulness to us, his covenant faithfulness to us. And so Hebrews chapter 11 walks through the entirety of the story, going all the way back to Abel, Enoch, Noah. I'm summarizing, and actually Hebrews, about midway through, also starts summarizing. Talks about the faith of Abraham. The faith of Abraham, who, though he did not completely understand the commands given to him, go from your father's house to this land that I have prepared for you. Sacrifice your only son. He didn't understand, but he obeyed in faith. In faith to the promises of God. You know, Abraham had been promised by God that Isaac would have many descendants, and of those descendants, kings would come from that line. And so he believed in the promise. We have the faith of Moses. And then again, here's where Hebrews starts to summarize in verse 32 and following. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, received promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and scourging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, of whom the world was not worthy. Of whom the world was not worthy. They believed in the promise of God, and they endured all to the glory, the fullness of the glory of God. You know, some of the stories that I mentioned yesterday, those stories of sacrifice, those stories of seeking glory, my focus really around the time I started teaching started to shift from some of those kind of war stories to the stories of the martyrs. Now, in Hebrews chapter 12, when it says that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, here's your Greek word for the day. The word for witness, repeat after me, is martyreo. Martyreo. Of course, where we get the word martyr. So to martyr is to witness to the faith. To witness to the faith. Now, there is the great martyrs, those who witness unto death, right? Who, like Daniel, in the book of Daniel, would say something to the effect of, I would rather die than bow down. I would rather die than not worship the one true God. He and his friends. So some were cast into the fiery furnace. He was cast into the den of lions. And yet they prevailed. Death rather than sin. And so I was enamored by some of the stories of the early martyrs, especially. Ignatius of Antioch, who was a disciple of the Apostle John, who, as he is being escorted to Rome for his execution, he's blasting off all sorts of letters. And he writes to the Roman Christians, actually. And as he's writing to the Roman Christians, something he says is, some of you might be tempted to try to rescue me. Don't mess this up for me. I go to God. Don't take this from me. Or Polycarp, who was a friend of Ignatius of Antioch and another disciple of the Apostle John. Polycarp, who was a bishop in modern-day Turkey, again, being led to his execution when he was 80 years old. He was over 80 years old. And his escorts, it's a several-day journey, his escorts basically fall in love with him. And they say, hey, we will let you escape, and we will take the blame.
His Roman escorts, not Christian.
Yeah, his Roman escorts. Now, if you let a criminal escape on your watch, bad things will happen to you in that age. They were willing to endure that punishment because they fell in love with Polycarp. But Polycarp said, no, I've run the race this far for the Lord. How can I stop now? One last one. Lawrence, who was a deacon in the church in the 3rd century, under the Emperor Valerian. Valerian ordered a particular oppressive persecution of the Christians. And the week before Lawrence's own eventual death, the Pope and 6 other deacons were martyred. And he was disallowed. He wanted to go with them, but he wasn't allowed to go with them. But eventually Valerian comes to him and he says, gather for me the riches of the church. And so Lawrence goes through the streets and he starts collecting the poor, the sick, the destitute, the lame. And he brings them before the emperor and he says, behold the riches of the church. And Valerian was so enraged that he ordered Lawrence's immediate death. And the particular form of death was to be laid out over a grate and burned alive. Now, as the story goes, at one point, while he is literally cooking over this grate, he turns to his executioners and he says, turn me over. I'm done on this side. You guys are laughing. What is wrong with us? No, but that's precisely the point, right? He had the peace of mind, the joy of heart, that he could crack a joke about his own death with the people who were actively killing him. Isn't this what we all desire?
Maybe not. Sorry. Yes, maybe not the cooking over a grate part, but
right.
the peace and joy, for sure. Well, I'll just say what everyone else is thinking since I have the microphone.
But I think all of us, though we would fear, I say these stories with fear and trembling, right? Please God, no. Don't bring me to this kind of end. But please God, yes, make my heart one that is willing to. I want that joy of Lawrence. I want that that desire that Susie shared the other night, that Ignatius shares. I want to go to God. I just want God. And how could they do this? Romans 8, starting verse 12 says, "So then, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of sonship. When we cry, 'Abba, Father,' it is the Spirit himself bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." The witnesses, the great cloud of martyrs of the Old Testament, bear witness to us the promise of God. And we see that alive and well in the church. Now, most of us probably will not face this kind of martyrdom. Okay? I live in suburban Denver. And even as crazy as Denver is getting, and we're getting kind of wacky, I'm not actively persecuted for my faith. Most of us are probably not to that same degree. Now, some of us maybe in our schools or in our workplaces have a hard time or have opposition, but to this degree, but yet we know that in the world this kind of persecution exists. Right? I think I read a headline just last week that in Nigeria, another 35 Christians or so were killed. This persecution does exist in the world, and we ought to pray for those communities who are enduring that, for their steadfast faith, their trust in the Lord and his promises. But again, what about us? What about us? We don't get to choose our cross. What is the cross today that Jesus is asking us to take up, right? Take up your cross daily and follow me. Right? What is our cross of the day? These men who we just identified and told their stories of, they were able to go to that horrific end, some to a burning, some to the lion's den, some to being burned. Polycarp, it's said that they attempted to burn him alive and it didn't work, and so they stabbed him to kind of finish the execution. Polycarp, he said he ran the race. He's run the race for 80 years. What does that race look like for us in our daily lives? How do we have that opportunity to live as Christ lived, right? He didn't just need to come and die, right? If that was the case, then why did the angel tell Joseph to take the child Jesus and flee to Egypt? If all Jesus needed to do was to come and to die, Bethlehem would have been perfect, yes? And he could have died among the other innocents. But no, the plan was for Jesus to live the life, to run the race to the cross. And if you've studied anything about what does a first century carpenter look like in Palestine, it's not a very exciting life. Lots of walking, lots of manual labor, lots of sun up to sundown days. We can probably say a lot about our own lives. And so how do we live as that witness for Christ? Those little crosses, those daily crosses. What does that look like?
When Alex read from Hebrews chapter 11 and that list of witnesses to faith, examples of faith, right? The story kind of ends with descriptions of what we think of as martyrdom, right? Those who are imprisoned and stoned and thrown to the lions and all of that. But the first several examples, right, Abel, yes, a martyr, as Cain kills him, but Enoch is taken up to God, right? He's not martyred. Abraham isn't martyred. Noah isn't martyred. But the point in Hebrews is that each one of these people throughout the history of God's covenant family, each one of these had faith. But I get to give a Greek word too, because I won't let Alex have all of the fun. Does anyone know what the Greek word for faith is? All right, and we'll call on the pastors second, if no one else knows. Pistis, yes. Pistis is the Greek word for faith. Can everyone say pistis? Pistis. It also means faithfulness, right? And so if we had time, I'd make everyone get out their Bibles and we'd compare all the different translations to see where it's translated as faith, where it's translated as belief, where it's translated as fidelity or faithfulness, right? Because that word in Greek encompasses all of those things. So these examples of faith in Hebrews 11, it's not just that they believed that God existed, although that's a really important first step, right? It's hard to be faithful to God if we don't believe that he exists. And it's not just that they had kind of good doctrine about who God is and the existence of him, but they trusted his promise and they acted according to that trust. And if we back up even further into Hebrews, back in chapter 3 and chapter 4 of Hebrews, the letter is talking about the example in the wilderness generation, the generation that came out of Egypt and had experienced those mighty works of God, but didn't have the faith to go into the promised land. And therefore, they did not enter into God's rest. As Alex and I were preparing this, we realized it was very quickly turning into a Bible study on the letter to the Hebrews, which could have taken all week and then some. So we're try and rein ourselves in on that a little bit. But what the generation that perished in the wilderness because they would not enter the promised land, it wasn't because they doubted that God existed. I don't think that doesn't seem to be the case in Exodus or in Hebrews. And it wasn't even because they doubted that God told them to do this thing, but they didn't trust his word. And so they didn't act on it, right? So these examples like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Enoch, Noah, Moses, these are examples not only of faith, but of faithfulness, of trusting in God's promise and acting on his promise. And whether we are going home to a situation where we are going to face opposition and struggle and persecution in a really obvious way for our faith, or whether we are not facing that externally, we are all going home to a situation where we are going to be called to be faithful. We are going to be called to remember God's promises, to trust in those promises, and then to act on those promises. In Hebrews 3, when it's talking about that example from the Exodus, it quotes from Psalm 95, saying, "If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts." What do you think the "if" refers to in that? If today you hear his voice, is it if God speaks today? Or is it if we hear today? I think God is always calling to us. I think that God is always speaking to us. Sometimes he makes us listen a little bit harder. Sometimes he makes it really obvious and really hard to ignore. But I think that he is always calling to us, always speaking to us. The if is, are we listening? Do we hear? If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. God is calling to us, and he is constantly revealing his will to us. All right, how many of you have at some point, or maybe regularly, thought or prayed, God, if you would just tell me what you want, I want to do it. Right? And there are certainly times and decisions where there is a period of discernment to go through, and we do that with prayer, we do that with consulting with people we trust who help us listen for God's voice. And so there are big questions. I don't want to trivialize that question of what is God's will for me, because that's something I have anguished over in my life at many points, and I'm sure that all of us have. But on a level below kind of that big life decision kind of thing, God is constantly revealing his will to us in the circumstances of the present moment. Many years ago, we couldn't remember when we first came across this book, and I think my parents introduced us to it. But it's the memoirs of an American Jesuit priest who desired to go minister in the Soviet Union. And you're going to have to, his name is Father Walter Ciszek. I can tell you how to spell it later because he's of Polish descent, so that tells you like how many consonants there are in that name. And he wanted to, but World War II broke out. So I guess so not the Soviet Union quite yet.
It was the Soviet Union, and he and two brother priests were sent to Poland,
Right.
To try to find a way into the Soviet Union. And of course, the Soviet Union was blocked off. They would not let a priest in for any reason.
An American or a priest.
And then World War II broke out, and Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland. And they just happened to be on the Soviet side, and so like, hey, we're already in the Soviet Union now because this part is conquered.
Let's just keep going.
Let's just keep going in.
Yeah.
And eventually, very quickly, actually, all three of them are arrested.
Almost immediately, the three of them were caught, were arrested as spies, and were imprisoned. And he spent years in solitary confinement in a Soviet prison. And then he spent almost 2 decades in, maybe 15 years, in work camps in Siberia. And in his memoirs, he talks, he's got 2 books. One of them focuses more on kind of the narrative of everything that happened, and that one is called With God in Russia. And then the other one is kind of his spiritual memoirs. He's reflecting on what God taught him during that time. And that one is called He Leadeth Me. I always mix it up with a different one. He Leadeth Me. And as he's reflecting on what he learned, over and over and over, he makes the point that he finally came to realize that he'd had all these plans and these desires to be a missionary and how to serve and to preach Jesus and him crucified. But he came to learn that whatever was happening to him in that moment, that was God's will for him. And he learned to accept that and embrace that and pick up that cross of the moment. Now, I do think that it's very important to distinguish kind of God's will for us in the moment when we're facing suffering, when we are facing loss, when we are facing some evil that has been done to us or to someone we love. It's not God's will in the sense that he is the cause of that evil, but it is his will in that he would not allow that to happen to us if it were not to be used for our good, right? That nothing happens outside of his will, nothing happens outside of or contrary to his providential plan for our good. I've read that book several times, and each time I read it, it hits me really, really hard in a new way, because that's a lesson that I need to keep learning over and over and over again. But this is how we know God's will for us. What are the circumstances I am facing in this present moment? Who is the person in front of me? It is God's will for me to love this person. Right? And sometimes there are still difficult questions of discernment and how do I best love this person in front of me? But it all boils down to God's will is for me to be where I am, loving the person in front of me. And so some of those exhortations that we offered Sunday night at the beginning of camp, we would like to offer again as we prepare to go home. And on one hand, it makes me really sad to be giving this talk on Friday morning because I hate going home from camp. And it's really hard. There are some things we look forward to. Who is ready to sleep in their own bed again? Shower in their own shower, right? Okay, so there are some definite benefits to going home. But here together, there is so much that is easier than it is at home, where we are all focused together on trying to be where we are, trying to love the person in front of us. And it really helps when the person in front of you is trying to love you back, right? Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to love the people who are trying to love us back sometimes. It's really hard to love the person in front of us when that person has no interest in trying to love us back, right? And yet we are called to do so. Do you want to share the Chesterton?
Oh,
quote?
yeah. The two things that come to mind for me right now, there's a G.K. Chesterton quote, is that God commands us to love our neighbors and our enemies, often because they're the same person.
So
The second thing, the ease of being up here sometimes, I'm reminded of Lewis's The Silver Chair, where Jill and Eustace are with Aslan, and he tells them, while you are here, you hear my voice clearly. The air is clear, and there aren't the distractions. But then he's going to send them on this mission, and down there, it will be more difficult, and you have to remember what you experienced here down there.
right, to help you listen, to help you recognize the voice of God speaking to you in the moment so that we can say yes. All right, so we want to go home with that reminder to strive, even though it's hard, to be where you are and to love the person in front of you. And this, to kind of try and bring it full circle, this is how we live and witness to and preach, whether with our words or with our actions, Jesus Christ and him crucified. Right? Many Christians, even today, are called to be conformed to Christ crucified in intense suffering and even in death. But all of us are called to be conformed to Christ in his loving obedience to the Father. Right? Whether that is a literal cross or a figurative cross, we are called to be conformed to Christ in his loving obedience to the Father. And even if we're not facing opposition and persecution that we recognize as such, to be obedient to the Father, for all of us, it's going to entail some suffering at some time, especially when we first start trying to really take that seriously, or maybe we start again to try and take that seriously, because my pride, my will, has some very different plans than the Father has. And to lay aside my pride and my will and choose the will of the Father, sometimes that hurts, right? Sometimes it hurts a lot. But the thing is, the more, and this is such a beautiful truth about the spiritual life, the more we try to do it, the more we cooperate with God's grace to do it, the more we kind of act like we are doing it, even if we don't feel it fully, the easier it becomes, right? Every single act of obedience, no matter how small, every single act of love conforms us more closely to the heart of Christ and gives us a greater capacity to love and to obey. So this is how we are conformed to Christ crucified. This is our, we can call it cruciformity in the daily minutia, or another term, and this is playing off of a friend's term that I found very consoling and encouraging. Another term I want to send you home with is the martyrdom of monotony. The martyrdom of monotony. As awful as it sounds to be eaten by lions, that's not going to last for terribly long, and it's going to be over. The daily martyrdom, the white martyrdom is another way it's talked about, the red martyrdom of blood, the white martyrdom that's sometimes silent, that's sometimes not observed, that's not recognized, that sometimes doesn't get the the support, that martyrdom of laying down our own will daily, that's something that we're called to do for our entire lives, right? Like Alex said, that is the running the whole race. And so we wanted to offer just a couple of points of encouragement for going home to that martyrdom of monotony.
So one of the things that we learned early on in our married life and shortly after Michael was born is that God is the God of the present, yes?
Yes.
In Hebrews 4, it keeps referencing today. If today you hear his voice, it's not if you hear tomorrow, it's today. We're not in tomorrow, right? Jesus tells us don't be anxious about tomorrow, right? Your problems of the day are enough. Yes? And what's really consoling about that is that we're given the grace for today, right? Why not be worried about tomorrow? Because we're not there yet. And God's grace is not going to be present to us until then.
I think it relates very closely to the miracle of the manna in the Exodus. What happened when the Israelites tried to gather enough manna to last them for a couple days, just in case it didn't show up tomorrow? It's spoiled, right? It's spoiled. They couldn't gather enough manna. What happens when you take the grace that God is offering to you and you try to kind of hoard it and conserve it? Like, okay, I'm going to need this later, and you're thinking ahead and worrying, not just planning and prudence, but worrying and being anxious, and I have to hold on to this grace because there might not be any more. The grace doesn't spoil. It's not a perfect analogy, but you're not using that grace, cooperating with it for what you need right now. His mercies are new every morning, as we sang this morning and earlier in the week. And so he gives us the grace for today. He doesn't give us the grace for tomorrow until tomorrow. And so we cooperate with his grace today, trusting that there will be a superabundance of that grace for tomorrow. And the way that we learned that kind of slowly and painfully as brand new parents was we always wanted a large family, and we wanted to be open to God's plan for our family.
When we first got married and people asked us how many kids do you want, I would joke, I'd like a soccer team, which is 11 plus 3 subs.
He stopped making that joke the day after Michael was born. Not because of Michael, but because of witnessing labor and childbirth. It wasn't Michael's fault. It was just biology. But so we always wanted that. And then trying to figure out life as new parents was really, really hard in a lot of ways. And we would go to church and I would see other families with more than one child. And I would almost feel like I was about to have a panic attack. Like, how are they doing this? Are they okay? I'm not okay, so they can't possibly be okay. And Michael's going to be an only child. And that's not what we wanted, but I could never possibly ever add another child into this mix. And yet, thanks be to God, we have Liam. And we have Jean Paul and Colette and Avila and Stella. But I was trying to live in the future, and I didn't have the grace for that yet. So part of being where we are and carrying the cross of the present moment is recognizing that we have grace for today, and God will give us grace for tomorrow when tomorrow is today.
And a related note there is we're often tempted to compare our crosses. Right? There's the family in front of us with 4 kids. We have the 1 kid. Well, they must be suffering so much more. And therefore, we have, a temptation to minimize our own.
Or to feel guilty if what we're experiencing seems hard to us.
Right. And so, to some extent, it's let your suffering be suffering. It's real. It's a cross. We don't have to pretend it. We don't have to sugarcoat it. We can let it be. And we can acknowledge that their suffering and their crosses are theirs. But what this gives us a freedom to do then is to be truly compassionate. If you break up the word compassionate, you get the Latin roots, which equate to passion and passion meaning to suffer with the other, to take upon their burdens as well. And as the body of Christ, we come together in a new way and we start to carry a more singular cross. But not to feel guilty, not to, say that their cross must be so much worse and therefore my cross isn't so bad. To let the crosses be what they are, because this is God's, again, providential plan to bring all of us closer to him. And as we demonstrated the other day, Ashley had us do up here, as we draw closer to him and his cross, we necessarily draw closer to one another.
And part of that, or flowing out of that, is the reminder to be gentle with yourself. Right?
How many of you are sinners? I should have said us. How many of us? Because I have to raise my... Here, I'll raise 2 hands. Do you fall? Do you fail? Of course you do. We're human. I mean, and what I mean by that is that we have that brokenness, right? We all have that wound. We all have that weakness. Of course we fail.
And guess what? God isn't surprised when you struggle, when you fall, when you fail. An image that was offered to me once was of a child learning to walk, right? Many of you are parents, and those of you who aren't parents, especially here at camp, we see little kids. Our little Stella is pretty good at walking most of the time, except downhill, and her new thing is trying to walk backwards. But when a child is learning to walk and trying to walk, and they stumble and fall, no good parent says, "Oh, how do you not have this figured out yet? I can't believe you've fallen down again." Right? God is not surprised, and he wants to pick us up and help us start again. And the thing that most gets in the way of being picked up so that we can start again is looking only at our own sin and not to him. So you're going to bring in Narnia.
No, I was going to bring in...
I was going to bring in Narnia.
There's a saying that Satan knows your name but calls you by your sin. God knows your sin but calls you by your name.
Yes, we'll leave it with that. I won't cloud it with another comparison. I'll tell you later, John Paul. All right, the last thing, and then we're going to end with the song that Alex referenced yesterday and move on so we don't fall too much further behind this morning. But the last thing is, we are not meant to do this alone. We are not meant to do this alone. Susie shared in her talk about how, I see Susie, about how important that church community in North Carolina was in being called home to that, and how healing and supportive that has been to have that. Some of us, many of us, hopefully are going home to families that can help us hear God's voice and encourage us, to churches that can help us continue to delve deeper into the heart of Christ. But not all of us are, right? And so kind of 2 things. If you are going home and you feel like you are not going to have the support that you need, please let someone know. You're in your prayer group, in your youth group, the person sitting next to you right now, right? We'll receive a roster with all the names and addresses and email addresses, and it's not exactly the same thing to do it from a distance, but it's a whole lot better than nothing. But at the same time, especially those of us going home to some kind of community and support, let's not put that burden of asking on those who are already looking ahead to isolation and challenges. And so ask in your prayer group, youth, ask in your teams, ask the people you sit with at our last couple of meals, right? What are you going home to? How can I pray for you as you go home? How can I support you when you go home? How can we stay in touch? And all of this, I say it to myself as much as anyone, because every year at camp, I'm going to do a better job of staying in touch throughout the year. And then the next year at camp, it's so good to see you again. What's happened this last year? Because I didn't stay in touch, and I don't know, other than what you put on Facebook, I don't know what's going on in your life.
We'll let the train pass, yeah. And then again, we're going to have Adam play as close, and we'll get out of the way. That song that I mentioned yesterday called Anywhere. Again, the group is called Gray Havens, And again, listen for the shift from the beginning to the end, and just that opportunity to accept that present moment, to be present here now, to have that encouragement that wherever God is taking you in the coming days, to be able to be present there.
Yep, present in his will, and to receive what he has to offer us in that moment.
Eyes wide, late night, windowsill open. There's a shadow at my back saying everything's broken. So I pointed to a star saying that's where I'm going. Second to the right, then straight to morning. Praying in the dark, please, if you got a moment. There's a shadow in my mind says you're never gonna notice that I've been dying inside. I've been trying not to show it, but I never wanna feel this way again. So take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere but here. Oh, take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere but here. I don't care, I don't care, I don't care where. Just take me anywhere, anywhere but here. I've been trying to keep the faith, I've been trying to trust the process, but it just feels like pain, doesn't feel like progress. And it seems like a waste if I'm really being honest. I've been trying to fly away, but I keep falling. And Neverland keeps calling. So take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere but here. Oh, take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere but here. And I don't care, I don't care, I don't care where. Just take me anywhere, anywhere. I could spend my nights staring at the sky, dream of ways to fly away, chasing happy thoughts or a better plot, while I lose another day. And what a tragedy to awake and see that I never learned to stay. So bring me to a place where I don't chase escape, somewhere I could find me safe. Don't take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere but here. Don't take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere but here. Don't take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere but here. Don't take me anywhere, anywhere. Don't take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere but here. Don't take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere here. Don't take me anywhere, anywhere, anywhere but here. Don't take me anywhere, anywhere. Eyes wide, late night, windowsill open.